The title of the story, The Human Warship, arrived. The stars went silent in 3 minutes. In a galaxy on the brink of forgetting its origins, a mysterious and colossal human warship, the Eidolon, arrives without warning, silencing the stars and all communication for 3 minutes. Commander Elyn Zorrin and historian Dr. Talo Vharn witness its haunting stillness and unravel its purpose. The Eidolon is not a weapon, but a reminder. A spectral figure, Soul Mera, reveals the ship's true role as an ancient human construct meant to archive, reflect, and recalibrate civilizations before they destroy themselves. As stars flicker back to life, the galaxy is left with a choice: heed the memory of what came before, or wait for silence to return. In the farthest quadrant of the galactic rim, where starlight dimmed into pale whispers and time often fractured in silence, the sensors aboard the Zorrin surveillance frigate Keltros flared a warning. Commander Elyn Zorrin stood rigid before the display, eyes scanning the anomaly with the quiet tension of someone who had long learned to trust her instincts over instruments. The readouts told her nothing intelligible, just warping gravitational arcs and the faint, inexplicable dimming of several nearby stars. But her gut said otherwise. "Another pulse," her science officer muttered. "But it's wrong. There's no source." Elyn didn't reply. Instead, she focused on the expanding ring traced across the holographic projection of the sector. Space, despite its chaos, followed rules. This did not. The void itself was folding, but not because of mass, because of presence. Half a parsec away, on a decrepit orbital station buried beneath asteroid shadow, Dr. Talo Vharn's gaunt face lit up with a spark not seen in him for decades. His fingers trembled as they ran across a centuries-old data slab, recovered from a derelict human relay beacon. The binary code that had puzzled him for months now matched the signal pattern spreading through the outer systems. 3 minutes. Over and over again, in endless sequence. 3 minutes until silence. His research had been a fringe obsession, long dismissed by both academic and military circles. The idea that humanity hadn't vanished but withdrawn, evolving past a need for interstellar presence, had always sounded too poetic. And yet here it was, an ancient human signal embedded in the very folds of space-time. Not a broadcast, but a warning. Or worse, a beacon. The Council of the Zorrin Consortium convened in emergency orbit above Jal Prime, their panic concealed behind centuries of practiced stoicism. Flickering holos projected the fading light of several rim stars, now lost to inexplicable darkening. They debated theories, supernovae, dark energy flux, black hole migrations, but all such explanations disintegrated under the reality of the data. Could it be an enemy weapon? Asked Prime Speaker Kyer. No known technology can do this, Elyn said, her voice firm. This isn't an attack. It's an arrival. You're proposing myth, spat General Darnex. You're suggesting humanity has returned with a vessel capable of silencing stars. I'm not proposing it, she replied coldly. I'm observing it. Across channels, across cultures, the name echoed with unease. Eidolon. It was half memory, half legend. The human warship, the ghost of soul. It was said that during the final days of Earth's reach into stars, they created one final ship. Not a weapon of conquest, but a deterrence. Not made for battle, but for judgment. A ship that would sleep until the galaxy needed to remember what silence really meant. 3 minutes. Talo couldn't stop replaying the countdown in his head. He leaned forward over the cracked console in his lab as he cross-referenced stellar maps from ancient Earth archives, his breath shallow with anticipation. The coordinates lined up. The anomalies matched. All of them pointed to the edge of Sector Varelius. Zorrin knew what she had to do. Prepare the Keltros for slipstream. We intercept the anomaly's path. You're flying into an event horizon, her first officer said in disbelief. I'm flying into an answer, she corrected. Talo sent a final burst transmission to Zorrin, overriding encryption protocols. They're not here to fight, he said in the message. They're here to remind us. The slipstream corridor opened like a wound in the sky, and the Keltros vanished into the dark. Behind it, entire systems stood still, unsure what approached or whether they had already been judged. The countdown began again, this time on every channel, in every tongue. No voice spoke it, But every receiver heard the same beat. A timer without a clock. A verdict without a trial. And then the first star went out. The Eidolon arrived without sound, without light, without intent, only presence. It did not breach subspace so much as reshape it, folding distance into stillness until it appeared impossibly vast above the crimson gas giant of Aurelius 9. The warship didn't move. It didn't need to. Space around it trembled with reverence or fear. It was hard to tell which. Commander Elyn Zorrin stood at the viewport of the Keltros, lips parted as the stars behind the vessel flickered and vanished. The Eidolon's surface shimmered with no consistent shape, its structure unreadable. No edges, no seams, just layers of obsidian curves that rejected sensor analysis and visual logic alike. She whispered, "It's not built, it's grown. Scanners can't lock," her science officer murmured. "It doesn't reflect or absorb, just displaces, like it isn't fully here." Then came the silence. The Keltro systems didn't crash. They obeyed an older command. Stillness. No alerts, no failures, no power fluctuations. Simply nothing. Even voices in the control room faded, as though the very air feared drawing attention. 3 minutes. The countdown didn't need to be heard. It lived in the spine, in the slowing of heartbeats, in the fading glimmer of thought. Outside, smaller alien ships, scouts, interceptors, couriers, had begun converging on the anomaly. They approached with formations tight and engines armed, broadcasting demands for identification. The Eidolon answered with silence. A Zalari cruiser opened fire. The beam never landed. It ceased, not exploded, not deflected. It simply did not exist past a certain point. The cruiser's engines dimmed, then its lights, then its presence. No wreckage, no debris. One moment, it was; the next, it was not. Elyn clenched the railing, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Get us back. If it sees us as hostile, we vanish too." But they were already inside its reach. Talo Vharn watched the warship from the edge of an orbital observatory tethered to Aurelius 9's second moon. He had never imagined it would appear so solemn. There were no weapons, no grand engines or aggressive displays. Just stillness and the authority of inevitability. He understood then why it had been called Eidolon, a phantom not of death, but of memory. He broadcast again, even knowing no signal would reach. "Captain Sol Mera, if you hear this, I remember, we remember." The transmission vanished into void like everything else. Across the galaxy, councils convened, fleets mobilized. The Vrethi hegemony declared a containment directive. The Han diplomatic axis demanded neutral observance. No one dared call an act of war, but everyone prepared for one. The Eidolon did not answer. It didn't acknowledge. It only was. On board the Keltros, time stuttered, not in clocks, but in sensation. The moment stretched. 3 minutes no longer felt like a countdown. It felt like a sentence. Crew members moved in slow motion, their voices thick and detached. "Commander," came a hushed tone from communications. "We're not receiving. Not just from Eidolon. From anything." "Say again." "No channels. No ships. No external data feeds. The stars, they're offline." Elyn turned, eyes narrowing. "Stars don't go offline." The officer whispered. "Then explain why we can't see them anymore." Elyn stared into the black, where familiar constellations should have glittered. Gone. All gone. The Eidolon sat at the center of a growing void. A silence that was not the absence of sound, but the severing of connection. No light. No data. No past or present. Just now and still it did not move. Zorrin considered evacuating. But where would they go? Navigation relied on the stars. And the stars had been taken. She felt the weight of something primal in her chest. A fear not of death, but of being unwritten. "We should never have come," her first officer muttered. "No," Zorrin replied, voice flat. "We needed to know, and now we do." In the final seconds, just before the clock's end, Talo Vharn noticed something on his display. A fluctuation not in the warship, but in himself. A resonance. The countdown wasn't a timer. It was a synchronization. across the minds of every sentient being within range. The Eidolon wasn't broadcasting. It was aligning. 3, 2, 1, and then nothing. There was no explosion, no collapse, just the unsettling stillness that followed. Commander Elyn Zorrin stood on the dim bridge of the Keltros, listening to the dead silence that now stretched across every communication channel, every backup frequency, even the low hum of the ship's auxiliary systems. The silence wasn't passive, it was intentional. It wrapped itself around her thoughts like pressure, not noise, but the absence of all confirmation that the universe continued to exist beyond these walls. "Commander," whispered her first officer, though no one knew why they still whispered. "Are we alive?" Zorrin didn't respond right away. Her eyes were fixed on the viewport, but there was nothing to see. The Eidolon remained where it had always been, occupying a point in space without urgency or motion, a silent titan surrounded by the blankness where stars should have been. It hadn't moved. It hadn't acted. And still, the galaxy had fallen quiet around it. "We are," she finally said. "For now." The crew had stopped trying to understand what had happened outside. Starfield's gone. System clocks desynchronized. Temporal drift in localized regions of the ship. Even the backup AI had gone mute, as if waiting for permission to speak again. Elsewhere, far below on the hollowed observatory station, clinging to the dying moon, Dr. Talo Vharn sat alone beneath the glow of analog lights, mercury tubes and backup circuits wired by his own hand years ago, meant to keep the station operating in the event of catastrophic digital failure. He hadn't expected to use them. Now they were the only illumination left. He pulled out the ancient human data slate he had recovered from a derelict listening post on the edge of the Solarian expanse. The slate still glowed faintly, untouched by the Eidolon silence. Its interface blinked once and displayed a single phrase in ancient Terran script. "The void is not empty. Listen." He recorded the message in his personal log, though he doubted the log would survive this. If Eidolon could erase fleets and dim suns, a few kilobytes of linguistic interpretation would be dust in moments. A flicker caught his eye. A shape, faint and human, standing in the vacuum beyond the station's transparent hull. It couldn't be real. Nothing could survive out there. Yet the figure remained, motionless, watching. A woman in a long coat, her hair drifting as though underwater, her eyes glowing with the same pale radiance as the warship. No suit, no oxygen, just presence. He pressed his palm to the glass. "So, Mera." The figure blinked once, and the darkness behind her shifted. Inside the Keltros, Zorrin's ship chronometers abruptly reset. Not to zero, not to any system's epoch, but to a time before recorded history. Long before the first alien races had left their homeworlds. She watched as her consoles blinked with useless data, biometric readings of extinct species, galactic coordinates that mapped to nothing, neural resonance patterns of long-dead civilizations. It wasn't a weapon, she realized. It was a library. The Eidolon wasn't attacking. It was remembering. "Commander," said a voice, crisp human and not from any comm channel. "Permission to come aboard." The bridge crew froze. Zorrin turned. A figure now stood at the rear of the bridge, unnoticed until it spoke. A tall woman, pale as moonlight, with sharp eyes that held millennia of thought. She wore no insignia, no armor, just the presence of one who had seen what others had only theorized. Zorrin stepped forward. "You're human." The woman nodded. "I was. Once." "What is the Eidolon?" "A message. A consequence. A record." Her eyes narrowed with something like sadness. "We gave the galaxy peace. We gave it warning. When it forgot, we gave it silence." Zorrin shook her head. "You silenced entire systems. You made the stars go dark. We didn't make them do anything. We disconnected them from consequence. For 3 minutes. That is mercy." From the viewport, the stars blinked once. Just once. One by one, constellations began to return, like eyes reopening after long sleep. "Why now?" Zorrin asked. "Because forgetting is louder than fear." And the galaxy had begun to scream again. On the observatory station, Talo looked back at the data slate. The message had changed. Remember what you were before the stars burned. He closed his eyes, a single tear running down his cheek. Not of fear, but of understanding. The Eidolon wasn't judgment. It was a reminder that what humanity had once become was not a myth. It was a mirror, and now the galaxy had a look. The stars had returned, but they no longer twinkled with innocence. Every shimmer bore the weight of memory, of judgment paused but not withdrawn. Commander Elyn Zorrin watched them from the Keltro's bridge, her crew still stunned into reverent silence. The woman who had appeared, Soul Mera, or the echo of her, stood at the viewport with hands clasped behind her back, her posture calm yet unyielding. She hadn't moved in 20 minutes, speaking only once to ask for quiet. Not that anyone dared to break it. "We are not here to punish," Soul finally said, voice low but firm. "Only to remind. You called us myths. Now we're your mirror." Zorrin stepped closer, her boots soft on the carbon floor. "And what happens now? That depends on you." The simplicity of the answer made it all the more terrifying. It meant the Eidolon had no final strike, no reckoning to deliver. It was a test of awareness, a ship-shaped truth, that in their arrogance, the galaxy civilizations had not only forgotten humanity, they had forgotten themselves. Forgotten fear, restraint, the humility that came with knowing they were not the first to rise, and perhaps not the last of all. On the station orbiting Varelius 9, Dr. Talo Vharn pieced together fragments of translated data from the Eidolon's signal waveforms. There were names encoded in gravitational harmonics. Civilizations no longer charted on any galactic map. The Alaric, the Brame Union, the 1200-year kingdom of Oth, and beside each, a timestamp, not of destruction, of departure. The Eidolon had not been the harbinger of annihilation. It had been a witness to extinction. An archivist. Talo realized what frightened the governments most wasn't the Eidolon's power. It was that it kept records. Soul turned to face Zorrin, her eyes glowing dimly with an internal light that neither brightened nor dimmed. "You are still small, but not insignificant. We once believed scale equaled purpose. We were wrong." Zorrin struggled to steady her breath. "Are you here to stay?" "No," Soul said gently. "We never stay. We return only when the stars begin to whisper that no one listens anymore. And if we forget again," Soul tilted her head, "then we return in silence. Just like before. 3 minutes. That's all it takes to change the tone of the galaxy." Zorrin sensed the weight of unspoken history behind every word. Not anger, not sorrow, a kind of cosmic weariness. The burden of memory carried too long. She thought of all the squabbles in council chambers, the threats postured in border zones, the technology developed not to explore, but to dominate, and how easily it could all be undone, not by fire, but by erasure. From the corner console, the ship's comms flared to life again. Channels long dormant sparked with cautious transmissions. "This is the Rodin Union to any listening vessels. We see the stars again. Is anyone out there? This is a Kaltari fold. Confirming return of navigational data. What happened?" Elyn stared at the console, unsure whether to answer. So stepped forward and gently placed her hand on the panel. Her fingers didn't tap. It was more like contact was enough. The transmission stopped. The channel muted itself. And a single phrase appeared on the screen. "Your voice is heard. Speak wisely." Then, without a word, Soul turned and began to walk toward the rear of the bridge. The doors didn't open. They yielded, as though she never pushed them at all. Zorrin called after her, unable to stop herself. "Will we see you again?" Soul paused only for a moment, halfway into the dark corridor. "Not if you remember." And she was gone, above the gas giant. The Eidolon began to shimmer. Its form didn't break apart. It simply dissolved, folding itself into dimensional threads that peeled away from this reality like silk caught in wind. As the last fragment of its mass vanished into the invisible folds of the void, the stars burned a little brighter, as though exhaling after holding their breath too long. Dr. Talo Vharn logged the final signature of the Eidolon's presence. Not a signal, not a flare, but a single gravitational whisper, coded in prime harmonics, a message for those who still listened. You are not alone in what you become. He shut down his equipment and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the stars. He knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even a warning. It was an invitation to remember, to grow, to choose. On the bridge of the Keltros, Zorrin stood alone, her crew slowly returning to their stations, uncertain but steady. The silence had been lifted, but its echo would last. And somewhere, far beyond light and shadow, the Eidolon moved through the dark, waiting for stars to go silent once more. The next video titled Aliens mocked Earth's soldiers, until one landed in their capital.